I read a story earlier which resonated with me on two levels. The first level was that it brought back memories of my own experience, and the second level was that since that experience, it's something that I felt very, very strongly about, and it has definitely, without question, shaped my views on the issue at hand. Um, Perhaps more profoundly than almost any other issue. So, um, perhaps I should explain some of the vernacular before I continue for my international viewers. The word yob in the UK context in our colloquialism basically means someone who hangs around. They're not necessarily a big time criminal. We're not talking about top drug lords or serial killers or something like that. We're talking about people who, I don't want to say petty crime because I think that word has problems, but someone who basically just hangs around, and they yell at passers-by for no reason. They get drunk publicly and do it in a way that they just want to cause other people a nuisance. They form a pack mentality, and basically they're just very, very selfish, callous people. Um, and I feel this is a very big problem in the UK. So I was reading this report. Apparently, the Scottish singer Susan Boyle has been having problems with local yobs in her town of Blackburn, West Lothian, which is near Edinburgh. And this has got so serious that neighbours have asked the police to intervene directly, not just in terms of taking reports of what's happening, but intervening to the point of protecting her. This is a complete disgrace. Apparently, groups of up to 15 youths, we often associate yobs with being younger, but it's not always the case, have been hurling things at her. They have been lighting paper and throwing at her. At one point, they even attacked the bus that she was on, threw stones at the bus. Um, this is very ugly and very insidious. And to people who think that this is trivial crime, I've been through this. This is the sort of crime that can really, what we have a lot of words for it, antisocial behavior, um, disrupting the peace. There's a lot of different words for it, but ultimately, what it all comes down to is that over time, this can ruin lives. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I would ask you to look at the case of Fiona Pilkington. It's in the public domain, so that's why I'm talking about it. She was a woman from Leicestershire a few years ago who, after weeks and weeks, actually years of torment from local yobs, she and her young daughter, who was disabled, she took her own life, and it just it got to the point where she felt that the local police were doing absolutely nothing to help them. That's how she felt. Apparently, she'd left suicide notes, and they literally hounded her to her death. That is the price of yob culture in this country. So I have absolute sympathy for Susan Boyle, but I think that case got highlighted because she's in the public eye. Um, the truth is, this is a very serious problem in this country. I don't want to get into the situation of talking about statistics because I don't know, in all honesty. It may well be that the problem isn't quite as bad as it used to be. I don't want to talk about statistics, but the truth is, this sort of crime, firstly, it doesn't always get reported because the public feel that it will not be taken seriously enough. And that's understandable when you consider the amount of judges in this country that have jobs like this and they give them a tap on the wrist. Now, this is one of those things that gets into ideological battles, and I I'm not hiding it. I'm not hiding the fact that I have very conservative views on this. I'm upfront about that. I believe that people who terrorize their neighbors should face the consequences. I'm just not interested in the argument that punishment is fickle. And this is why, you know, I can understand people who say that, oh, we need to look at the background, that we need to know why they're doing this. Quite often they're from broken homes, etc. I understand that, and I'm willing to listen to that argument because I think there's certainly truth in it. And of course, you can't fight a fire without tackling the base of the fire. I get that. So I'm okay with that argument, and I'm okay with debate over how to reduce recidivism rates. I'm okay with that. But what I have no tolerance or respect for is the school of thought that says, oh, well, they've had a hard time in life, therefore they shouldn't be punished. That's something I have no respect for. Firstly, because what they are putting the victims through, there's no moral equilibrium there. The fact they may have come from a difficult background is no excuse. It's it's something that needs to be looked at. But when you start saying that every single action that a criminal takes, oh, it's because they came from a bad background, or maybe they had an abusive parent. You know, the caveat to this argument is that there are people who've had those negative experiences in life as well, but they don't resort to crime. They don't take it out on fellow members of society. That's why just don't have much tolerance for it. I get, I totally get that someone grows up in a household where, let's say, the father is a heroin addict and the mother is going out selling her body. Clearly, that sort of environment is going to be destructive for a child's upbringing. Of course, it is. But there is also a utilitarian question here, which is that those who are being terrorized by crime, first and foremost, need to be protected and first and foremost deserve justice. Something I have no patience for is this liberal left argument that we're all in it together and it's like the offender is on the same moral equilibrium as the victim. These are people who will not, they don't even like the use of the word yob. Oh, it's degrading, it gives them a negative image. Damn right it does. I call it a little bit of balancing the playing field because when you're in that sort of circumstance, when you are literally frightened to leave your own home, when you have a situation where every time you leave your home, you're thinking, am I going to be targeted by someone? Am I going to get something thrown at me? Am I going to be assaulted for no reason? This is the sort of thing that can really wear people down. And you might think it's harmless, but if you think it's harmless, then you have never been through it. You don't know what it's about. You just don't know. And the ignorance of the liberal left when it comes to understanding how victims feel, frankly, makes me furious. I'm not saying that every victim feels the same way, but the vast majority of victims of this sort of crime want to see some sort of justice. And I think that the likes of the Green Party, they're just utterly delusional when it comes to this sort of crime. Their attitude is anti punishment. It's not about recidivism. It's not about reducing reoffending. It's not about saying we need to understand the background. They are actually anti punishment. That to me is a totally different thing. I do not believe it is inconsistent to say, yes, we need to look at the root causes. Yes, we need to address that. Yes, punishment alone is fickle. But you know what? Punishment does have a purpose. And the argument that it's just about revenge is beyond crap, quite frankly. Why? Because if it was just about revenge, then it would be the case that the victim is doing exactly the same to the offender as they have done to the victim. In other words, if you have a young family forced from their home because local yobs have been throwing bricks at their windows because maybe they have a different accent or they're new to the area, then the argument that that is, I lost my trail of thought, but it just it makes me so angry to see people defend this sort of crime. And they'll always say, oh, we're not defending it. But if you're going out of your way to say that the criminal should be understood, that there shouldn't be punishment, then yes, as far as I'm concerned, that amounts to defending the criminal. Punishment does have a place. Oh, yeah, that brings me back. I said it's not about revenge. So if it was the young family, then they would be forcing the yobs out of their homes. It's not about revenge, it's about the utilitarian question. And anyone who's ever been through this will know just how stressful it can be. They will know the mental anguish, the sheer stress that few other things can wear people down as much as this sort of crime. And that's why I feel we need to take it far more seriously in this country. It's not good enough just saying, oh, well, you need to behave yourself, do a bit of community service. You know, the liberal left are very quick to point out, oh, but the rates of recidivism are very high in the British penal system. That may be true, but that doesn't mean that community service is automatically perfect. Is community service working when you have a situation of an offender literally laughing at it on their 50th offence? Clearly, in that case, the punishment needs to be intensified. I do believe that it is time that we had some sort of different approach to this. It could be, for example, forcing these sort of offenders to wear some sort of uniform. If we are going to leave the EU, I'll be honest, although I voted Remain, one area that always concerned me about the EU was the number of our laws that are made in Brussels. And it is one area where I was more sympathetic to the Leave side. So if we are going to leave, then let's get the best deal. This is one area we could look at. Let's actually form our own laws. Let's have a situation where we actually have punishments that are proportionate to the crime. This would not be getting in the way of due process because people who are accused of something would still have their day in court. I'm a strong believer in due process. They would still have their day in court. All the evidence would need to be there, but there has to be a level playing field here. And this has to be about empowering people whose lives are made a misery by yobs. I'm not going to put in expletives in this video about how I feel about them, but suffice to say, I I absolutely have no respect for these sort of people. I think they are absolutely. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to put expletives, but I think you get the idea. I'm not going to put expletives because they don't deserve my energy for how I feel about them. But anyway, people need to understand they are not victims, they are bullies. This sort of crime degrades and bullies people, it brings people down, and it destroys lives. It is an absolute quality of life infraction, and it makes me so angry when I see people failing to understand that there has to be some sort of consequence for this. Punishment is not fickle. Punishment does serve a purpose, and if you think it doesn't, you're an idiot, quite frankly. If you think, when I see people saying, "Oh, prison doesn't work," it's just punishing them. It makes them angrier. To me, that is like saying, "Oh, well, let's just give them what they want." I honestly think that is that school of thought that if you're saying criminals shouldn't be punished, your mentality is let them do what they want. If you cannot even bring yourself to forcefully support community sentencing, my God, if you cannot even do that, then I lose hope. And when I look at the likes of the Green Party, and I know I've mentioned them previously, but I do think they have a serious problem when it comes to crime. They're utterly delusional in terms of understanding what victims of crime want. What victims of crime want is justice. Yes, of course, people want recidivism, but they often do things that say, "Oh, well, look at the Nordic model," and they'll always point out how low crime rates are in Norway and Sweden, and so on. Those are countries that have notoriously lenient attitudes to crime. Well, what I would contend is yes, they have proportionally lower crime rates, although that's actually a contentious claim because in urban parts of Sweden, for example, violent crime has arguably been rising. This is a matter of debate. It's not a case that these are utopian paradises where no crime occurs. It's not that simple. Also, if you look at two other countries that have low violent crime rates, Singapore, Japan. You know what? Both those countries take a very hardline attitude to crime. So it's not a case that if you're lenient on the criminal, that reduces in low crime rates. It just doesn't. I'm not suggesting necessarily that the American approach is the right answer, just jail everyone, but that has never been the case. That has never been the case. So when the liberal left say, "Oh, just jailing people will is the answer," they're sending out a false narrative because they're giving the impression that jail is a consequence for every crime. The vast majority of crimes it isn't. So they're scaremongering. They're implying that we're some sort of authoritarian society. If anything, the real authoritarianism comes from this yob culture because it is the yobs that have the power in that dynamic, and it's something that these liberal left people do not get. And I'm not talking about everyone who's on the liberal left. In fact, I would argue traditional liberals would absolutely be forcefully defending the victims, not the criminals. I think it was John Stuart Mill who said, true liberty is a liberty for the many to live free from fear. Now, when you have a situation where yobs are ruling the context of an environment, of a social environment, then what is happening there is that they're the authoritarians because they're imprisoning people in their own homes, literally. So I really find myself getting very angry when people try to argue that there should be no punishment. Yes, let's talk about reducing crime levels. Let's talk about looking at sources, etc. But where there is a crime, there has to be a consequence. If you don't give a consequence, all that teaches, especially a young offender, is there's nothing wrong with what you're doing. And when you get young offenders saying, oh, I can get away with it because I'm a young offender, what sort of message is that sending out? When then the liberal left basically reinforce that idea. It pisses me right off. I admit this is something that makes me so angry because I know what that is like. So yeah, we do need a different approach. I would absolutely be in favour of providing uniforms for this sort of offender because they take great pride in, the fact they think they can do whatever they want. Put a uniform on them, it humiliates them. It shows them that they're being made to pay for what they have done. I'm not saying it would automatically reduce crime, but I would like to see it at least tried. In the UK, independent police forces, that is to say, police forces county by county, can make their own directions on how to approach crime. And obviously, they're the people who have the statistics. But there has to be a certain degree of democracy in this. Victims need to be listened to. And I do think that when you have a situation, the police have a very difficult job. It isn't always their fault. Sometimes I do feel they can do more. But it's also, I feel judges have a lot to answer for. When these cases are brought before court and then the judge gives them a tap on the wrist, it makes me so angry. And to be quite honest, there's parts of the United States I think, yeah, actually, maybe we do need to look at that approach. Look at the sheriff in Arizona. I forget which county, but he's famous for having a particularly hard line approach to crime there. Maybe, just maybe, that's what we need to do here. There was a former mayor of Middlesbrough took that approach, and it went down quite well from what I recall with locals because they recognised that this was finally starting to put the public first, not put the criminals first. And when the liberal left argue that we need to understand and we need to, oh, punishment's just fickle, etc. To me, that's like saying, let them do what they want. That's basically what you're saying. Give the bullies what they want. So if you defend criminals in that sort of way, then all you're doing not only is insulting their victims, you're propping up their power. You're propping up their power. Shame on you. Shame on the Green Party. Shame on those who argue that people who terrorize society shouldn't feel the consequences. You're delusional. You're callous and you're ignorant.